What I'd like to do now is invite our three special guests to come to the stage, and I will introduce them. We're going to have a conversation. We did this last year, and it was great fun. We have three amazing leaders who have agreed to join us and who are going to speak from their experience and their knowledge, and I have every expectation they will share some humor with us as well. So while they're coming forward, let me give you some information about who they are. Linda K. Smith is the Deputy Assistant Secretary and Interdepartmental Liaison for Early Childhood Development in the Administration of Children and Families at the United States Department of Health and Human Services. That title, Linda, Linda's the Chief Poopah for child care, early education, Head Start, and child protection. So she does this and works very closely with Secretary Sebelius. In this role, she provides overall policy coordination for Head Start, Early Head Start, the Child Care Development Fund, which is what pays for our child care subsidy here in the state, as well as serving as the liaison with the U.S. Department of Education and other federal agencies. Her office serves as the focal point for early childhood policy on the federal level. Linda previously served as the Executive Director of the National Association of the Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies, where she represented more than 650 community-based agencies concerned with the care of children in their earliest years. Linda Smith led the organization through significant growth and transformation. She was a driving force behind NACRA's national policy agenda and a strategic plan to improve the quality of child care nationwide. Key components of NACRA's advocacy efforts included strengthening child care licensing, oversight requiring comprehensive background record checks, and establishing minimum training requirements for child care workers. But prior to that, and this is part of this connection we have on stage, prior to NACRA, Linda served as the Legislative Fellow and Professional Staff for the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee under the chairmanship of the late Edward M. Kennedy. And prior to that, she was working with the Office of Family Policy for the Secretary of Defense, where she was one of the primary architects of the military's child care program. She has held positions, she's worked for many years for the U.S. Army and the United States Air Force. She actually began her career in early childhood at the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in her native state of Montana. And Major General Lucky was commissioned as an infantry officer in the regular Army after graduating from the University of Virginia in 1977 with a Bachelor's of Art in English. He made multiple assignments both as an infantryman and subsequently a Special Forces officer in a variety of overseas venues prior to obtaining his JD from the University of Connecticut in 1985. Major General Lucky has commanded forces in every echelon from Special Forces Operation Detachment in the 10th Special Forces Group in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, to serving as the commanding general of the 78th Division Training Support in Edison, New Jersey. And he's led U.S. forces in combat during operations of Just Cause, Desert Storm, the Iraqi Freedom. Prior to his selection to serve as the assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of Reserve Matters, Major General Lucky headed the Office of Security Cooperation in Baghdad, Iraq, where he led the joint team in implementing key aspects of the U.S. Security Assistance Program, to include dramatically increasing the Iraqi-funded acquisition of major weapons systems in support of internal security. Largely as a result of his close working relationships with senior Iraqi leaders in 2011, Major General Lucky was also designated by the chairman to serve as the joint staff lead for all matters pertaining to the U.S. transition in Iraq from the Department of Defense to the Department of State. And in addition to his 35 years of military service, Major General Lucky retains his status as a partner in the firm Blanco, Tackberry, and Matamoros in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where he actively practiced as a trial lawyer from 1991 until his deployment in Iraq in 2008. Major General Lucky's awards and decorations are typical of an officer of his years of service who's had the good fortune to return safely from a variety of worldwide deployments and operations. They include the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star Medal, Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal, Southwest Asia Service Medal, Operation Iraqi Freedom Campaign Medal, Special Forces Tab, Combat Action Badge, Expert Infantry Badge, Pathfinder Badge, and Parachutist Badge. There we go. And, you know, folks give us their, they share with us their background so that we can introduce them. But this, I think, is my favorite part of what General Lucky shared. So I say this to you, Mr. and Mrs. Fisher. It was written for me to say that he is blissfully married to a Tar Heel. The former Julie Marie Fisher of Greensboro. Her parents are able to be with us today. And he remains cautiously optimistic. They're not here. This is that his 3 children, Alyssa 28, Max 25, and Tim 22, will all be serving in the U.S. Army soon. And our third guest is Bill Shore. Bill Shore is the chairman of the Institute for Competitive Workforce, their board of directors at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and is also chairman of the President's Roundtable for the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards in Washington, D.C. He's recently retired, and he served for 27 years as the director of U.S. Community Partnerships with GlaxoSmithKline, where he was responsible for building relationships with key external stakeholders and developing Glaxo's reputation and commitment as an intelligent and responsible corporate social investor. Shore led the U.S. Community Partnerships team and served on the U.S. Corporate Contributions Committee, which determined GSK's corporate social investments in the U.S. And he was a member of the company's site leadership team at RTP in near Raleigh, North Carolina. Shore is on the board of the Caring House in Durham, North Carolina, and the past chairman of the North Carolina Communities and Schools Board of Directors, the chairman of the Students Affairs Advisory Board at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He's past chairman of the Business Advisory Council for Durham Public Schools, and he also serves on the boards of the Greater Durham Chamber of Commerce, the Arthur Ashe Institute for Urban Health in New York City, the Advisory Board for Children's Health Fund in New York, at the Hill Center in Durham, where I believe your daughter's teaching, is that correct? And the Keenan Fellows Advisory Board, the Business Civic Leadership Board at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Board of Advisors of the Raleigh Chamber of Commerce, the Campbell University Presidential Board of Advisors, and the Friends of the Nasher Museum Advisory Board at Duke University. Wow. Let's welcome them. So like I said, we're going to have a conversation, and we were going to ask Linda to start. And really, we wanted you to give us sort of a big overview of what you think the administration's priorities are around young children, kids from 0 to 5. So help us.
And the problem is they said keep it to 5 minutes.
That's right.
That's hard for me, just so you know. Actually, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity to come down here and be a part of a discussion like this. It's terrific. I want to start by saying I don't think it's a surprise to anyone in this audience of what the administration's sort of goals and vision are. And I think they are embodied in what we are doing around Race to the Top, Early Learning Challenge, as well as the designation renewal system around Head Start. And that basically is to ensure that all children who enter our schools are entering schools ready to learn and with what they need to be successful later on in life. And that's fairly simple in many ways. I like to put that another way, because one of the things that I'm going to make a first link to my former military background. I had an Army colonel, and you'll know General Lucky he'll instantly recognize this. He was Brown Shoe Army, and he'll know what that means. And he said to me one time when we were talking about early childhood, he said, "Linda, give it to me simple, stupid." And so I think one of the things that I have paid attention to over my career is how do we say what we're trying to do in language that the average person can understand and not make it too jargony. So I really try and say that what we're trying to do in this administration is to ensure that all children who are cared for with funds that are public funded programs are safe, healthy, happy, and learning. And in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to do and what we're all about. So how do we really do that? I think there are two things that this administration is keenly interested in. And in some ways, a little bit controversial in the sense that this is new to our field. And I hope this becomes part of the dialogue that we have up here today. And that is, at the heart of it is, number one, competition. And why competition? Competition is a goal to encourage creative and new thinking about what it is we're trying to do with children, back to those 4 simple things. And the second piece of that is about accountability. And I think we have to be more accountable and for public money that is entrusted to us. As we all know, the economy is struggling to recover, and every dollar is precious in this country. And so accountability is the second piece that's at the heart of what we're doing. So I was also asked to give a little bit of just, what are the challenges then that we face as we begin to move forward? I think, and I've tried to summarize those with essentially 5 things. We have too many programs, especially in early care and education, that are stovepiped, and we need to rethink that. That we cannot have programs duplicating efforts and competing for the same children. We have a workforce that is ill-prepared, and we'll talk about that more, I hope, later on, because the military is one of the organizations that realizes that we have serious problems around our workforce. And our workforce in early childhood, we need to focus on that. I think we have a lack of coherent standards that guide early care and education in this country with little consistency across the states, and we need to think about that and figure out what we're going to do with it. We have a monitoring system in this country. If you look across all 3 of the major components of early care and education, the first one being child care, Head Start, and then pre-K, that our monitoring system is dysfunctional, and we need to think about how we're going to do a better job of that, and that gets to the accountability. And finally, we have no clear strategy on how we're going to finance the improvements that are so desperately needed in the early years. So some of the strategies that they said, would I offer some ideas to the audience in terms of strategies to think about? Well, I start with what I said before, talk simple, stupid, and get people to understand what it is we're trying to do in terms that they can get. Because this is not a partisan issue. No one wants to see children that are in unsafe, unhealthy places, unhappy, or not learning. That is just not an American value, so we need to be thinking about the communication. Don't be afraid to put real issues on the table. As a part of competition and accountability, we need to think about what are the issues that we're struggling with, especially around the stovepipes, and how do we fix that. We need to look for the middle ground. We always need to know what it is. One of the things that I learned under Senator Kennedy, if nothing else, is that the man defined the left in this country, there is no question, but he knew how to move to the center and get a compromise. And I watched him do it time and again, and I think we need to learn that lesson about how do we begin to compromise and move in a way that allows us to move forward. And finally, create pathways, not barriers. And when I say that, I mean, we should not view this field as either or. Either it's a degree or training. It needs to be a combination of both, and how do we move people from one to the other. So in closing, I would say that this administration is basically has one thought in mind, that we obviously know that what we're doing isn't working, It hasn't gotten us where we need to as a nation, and more of the same is not going to be what we're about. So we need to be thinking about new ideas and about new partnerships, and we have two here on this stage, and thinking about how we engage other parts of our community in the work that we do. And I know that that is a real strong point for Smart Start. So those are my thoughts and ideas.
What a great start. So General, yes, thank you. So General, when we talked earlier, you talked a little bit about the military's role and actually talked a little bit about why you thought it was such a big deal that we pay attention to what's happening to little kids, both kids that are being served on the bases and all the other kids. So would you elaborate a little for us?
Okay. First of all, thanks very much for having me here. It's an absolute honor, and I do want to recognize my in-laws, since Julie couldn't be here. Walt Marilyn Fisher. Walt's a veteran of the Korean War, and I honor the service of every veteran who has served wearing the cloth of the United States of America. So I just want to put that out there first. Two things very briefly, because I want to get to the dialogue and Bill. But one thing I'd say is that it's fairly unique for a military officer to get up on a stage and talk in an environment like this about something that he frankly knows very little about. Okay, I say anything here at my peril because I realize I'm preaching to the choir, and I am among experts, and I am certainly not an expert in your business. I do know something about national security. That's sort of my responsibility to know something about it. And I know something about human capital and the absolute necessity of us investing in human capital in this country in order to remain competitive in the world. I would tell you this, and I'll talk about the military challenge in a minute as well, but I would just say this. I think it is very important that we as American citizens, regardless of party affiliation, regardless of background, regardless of economic challenges or the nature or of our origin or our upbringing. I think it's very important for all of us to understand that this is fundamentally becoming a national security issue. And I say that advisedly because those are powerful words. I understand that. But you are living in an age when of the group of kids between the ages of 18 and 25 in the United States, only 1 out of 4 of them is even eligible to enlist in the United States Army. That is a sobering fact, and it is absolutely true. I talked to audiences. I talked to a group in D.C. about a week and a half ago and laid that on them, and people came up to me afterwards and they said, did you get that backwards, General? And I'm saying, no, for those of you who think that the military takes only those kids that can't find something else to do in the civilian world, you're living in a different age. In this age, we only have about 24% of kids between that age group I just mentioned that are even eligible to enlist. I'm not talking about going into special forces or going to OCS or going on a nuclear submarine. I'm talking to enlist in the United States Army to do any job the Army has. So that makes it a challenge for us from a national security perspective. I'd also say it's a challenge for us from a national security perspective, and then it isn't just about the military and filling the ranks of the military with talented people. It's obviously about our ability to compete as a nation economically on a global scale, which is clearly the challenge of our time. So I would just say that the end hinges upon the beginning. The sooner we invest in human capital on the front end, the less we spend on the backside. I'm not going to stand up here and quote a bunch of statistics to you because you all know them better than I do, but I'm very aware of the costs associated with not doing this job right at the beginning, and the cost in terms of dollars and the almost, dare I say, criminal loss of human capital is staggering. So we need to get at this. I'd also say we need to get at it responsibly. One of the things I got a whiteboard in my office in the Pentagon. I've only had one thing written on it for 3 years, and it's a quote from a guy named Rutherford. Rutherford was a Kiwi. He was the first Kiwi person from New Zealand who goes to England to be the head of the British Observatory. And he shows up and he thinks he's got this great job because it's a great honor. He's the first New Zealander to ever go to London to get this job, but he finds out that the Crown had pulled all the funding as he shows up. So he's got no money. So he gets all the guys together who are running this operation, he sits them down at a table and he says, gentlemen, we're out of money. It's time to think. And that's what I've had on my board for the last 3 years, because we aren't exactly out of money, but it is time to think. You know, and I say this from a military perspective. I'm not picking on anybody other than myself. We have printed money and spent money on programs, frankly, with reckless abandon. And for all the right reasons. Soldiers in contact, soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in contact, families suffering. We want to make sure that our kids get the best equipment, the best training possible. But we spend an awful lot of money doing it. And frankly, we haven't necessarily done some of the things that the Assistant Secretary was just talking about. We haven't necessarily focused on what's really working and what can we no longer afford to invest in. And that's where we are today in the U.S. military. Because we all know that for every dollar I invest in ammunition, that's a dollar I can't invest in something else, and vice versa. So we're getting down to hard choices. And I would encourage you all to embrace this challenge, to think these things through with some real intellectual rigor, because we need all the help we can get. One last thing, and then I'll be quiet. The military has a unique challenge in the context of early childhood development and education in general, in that you all know this because you live it, and for those of you who are from Carolina, this is a state that has been on the vanguard, not only of this program, but also supporting the United States military. And I applaud the state of North Carolina specifically for the tremendous support it's given to the uniformed services of the United States of America. So North Carolinians probably know better than most folks in this country, but the reality is the Army and the Marine Corps and the Air Force and the Navy, by and large, are coming home. And we've come out of Iraq. I'll talk to people about managing Iraq transition offline if you want to pick on me for not doing a great job. But we're coming out of Iraq. We're out of Iraq. We're coming out of Afghanistan. I don't know how fast, but it'll be pretty quickly, my guess will be, for most of the forces. And so the forces are coming home. And these are forces that have been at this for over a decade. And so I would just tell you that there are a lot of families out there that have a lot of challenges that they either know about or don't yet see, but they're coming. And one of the things that concerned my former boss, Admiral Mullen, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, more than anything else was, he said, I just feel like there's so many families out there and so many kids out there just hanging on, waiting for this to end. And he said, and I'm really concerned about what we're going to look like when we're done and the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are home. So I think, that's a particular challenge for the reserve components of the U.S. military, because as opposed to, kids going back to, when I say kids, that's anybody under the age of 57, but, kids going back to Fort Bragg or to Camp Lejeune, or to the station up in Elizabeth City or those Cherry Point, these are soldiers and sailors, airmen, and Marines who are going back out into America writ large. And they're not going back to some base. They're not going back to, if you will, a support architecture that's ready to help them. They're going out to small towns all over this state and all over this country. And I would just ask you to be very attuned and alert to the challenges that they're going to face, their families are going to face, and particularly their young kids are going to face in this new environment. I'll leave it at that. Again, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to be here, nor can I tell you how much I appreciate the energy and the determination and the character represented by everybody in this room. This is a national issue. This isn't just about doing the right thing, although it is the right thing. It's also about making sure that we, at least on our watch, ensure that the American dream doesn't become the American memory. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much. So, Bill, however did you get into the early childhood business here? You were working for a drug company, one of the biggest in the world, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So now?
Well, it is a little interesting, Stephanie. Number one, you didn't check my high school grades or I'd never be on this stage right now. Thanks for not checking on me. And to be able, and I'd like to echo what the other folks have said, to thank you for inviting me to be involved. This is very special cause and one of my passions, to be honest with you, because over the years, as I've been involved in this whole issue of the future for children and futures of families on behalf of a pharmaceutical company who was in it, and every major company I know of in the country thinks K-12 education is its top priority in terms of support for local communities. I don't know of a single company that doesn't feel that way, because in our mind, it's a Sputnik moment in this country. And you'll probably hear a lot of these kind of comments from us on stage today, because we had a call to get ready for this, didn't we, Stephanie? A few people and the general, and so I couldn't wait to find out what a lawyer turned general looked like. It was just great.
Now you know.
No, I know. A lawyer gone good. Yeah.
I like to think of myself as a recovering lawyer.
And so it's really interesting from a personal standpoint. My wife taught kindergarten for about 20 years. My daughter, as you mentioned, Stephanie, was a teaching fellow here in North Carolina, got her master's in special ed, teaches kids with learning disabilities at the Hill Center and tutors some now. I've got grandkids now. I know I don't look like it, but I have grandkids. I recently retired. I had to. People were coming up to me all the time, looking at me and said, "Are you retired?" And I said, "No, I just look like it." So I finally went ahead and did it. But you know, I look around the room, and I know quite a few people here I've worked with over the years, like Robin Brett and Laura Benson, and people that are very special. But every single one of the people in this room, and there are probably 1,000, go back to your local communities. That's where the rubber hits the road. We can do everything we want to do on a local level. I'm involved with I'm on the national level, involved with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as Stephanie said, and Governor Hunt got me involved. Look, if you're in North Carolina, Governor Hunt's going to get you involved, right? When he looks at you and says, "You one of the state's finest corporate citizens,"
pretty well.
you will do whatever he wants you to do. So our company gave the first $1 million gift, I think, to Smart Start, and then every other company kind of fell in line. They just knew he was going to call, so they just wrote checks. And so, but it's been, you know, so that's a lot of years. But everybody goes back to local communities. It's one thing to be at 30,000 feet and have policy discussions and that kind of thing, but it's what happens in the lives of every single child, whether it's in Durham, whether it's in Transylvania County, whether it's in Halifax County. It's what each of you do when you go back to your local communities that matters the most. And I think everybody's fighting the good fight. We're going to end up, obviously, funding is probably the toughest situation going these days, but we do have to think. And I think we have to think about how to collaborate more. We don't need to be territorial about this issue. We have so many organizations that are supporting incredible programs, but what's our strategy in each local community about how we address this issue? Are we all working together as effectively and as efficiently as we need to? And that's one of the things I think the business community has been able to bring to the table to some degree, is the ability to be a little bit more strategic. And I think in those communities where you're able to have the leadership, whether it's a mayor, whether it's a superintendent of schools, who brings the right people together around the table to talk about how are we going to address this, which I think this problem with the children in America and the issues and families, that should have been bailed out, as a matter of fact. And that's where hundreds of billions of dollars should have gone, because that's the future of our country. So I'll stop talking. My secretary, who I was with 23 years, said I had the right initials, BS. So I'll turn it back to Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm gonna pitch it back to you, though, Bill, because we had a conversation earlier about your idea that, in fact, we should be making this major investment and what it looks like in local communities. And we were talking about the May 8th election. And so I thought maybe I'd encourage you to speak a little on that.
There are some things I just shouldn't say to Stephanie. I drove in from Chapel Hill this morning, And as riding through a couple of neighborhoods, all these signs are out for the marriage amendment, you know, for or against, vote for, we're a family against, or a family for, and it looked like little mushrooms popped up everywhere around an issue that, whether you're for or against it, you know, it is getting all the attention. It is, you have ministers in pulpits standing up and doing the best they can to convince their parishioners that it's you should be for it or against it. You've got political advocates, you've got money coming from everywhere to fund it. Why in the heck haven't we been able to rouse that kind of passion and zeal around the plight of our children? So don't get me started on this, but I think what's happened over the years, we've had so many meetings, and you guys have had an incredible conference, I know. But I've been in a lot of meetings for 20 years talking about education and kids and families, and we really haven't seen much change in the statistics. And we don't need more meetings, we need a movement. We need a strategy. God, I might run for office. This is pretty good.
I thought you were.
Sounds good.
We were here last year. We were here, and we were with Governor Hunt and Dave Lawrence, from a great leader from the state of Florida. And Dave talked the whole time about his movement, and it's his movement for children. So I think that people in this room certainly agree with that concept in a very big way. But Linda, so you sit at the head of this organization that sets standards and has the opportunity to be the bully pulpit for what's really right for little kids and their families and the people who work for them. So if you were going to talk to this captive audience we have who really do live in local communities and make things happen. You know, one of the amazing things about the Smart Start family is we actually make real things happen. What would you tell them were the 3 most important things they needed to do when they got home?
Well, first of all, I'm going to vote for you, so if you run, I'll come. It sounds very convincing, and boy, do we need that movement in this field. So I say we all get behind him and push him in there to run for office.
You know, my friends from high school, I can't run.
You know, I do think that one of the things, and I alluded to it earlier, Stephanie, that I think we in the field, it has something to do with what I was saying about the simple stupid comment that I got years ago. I think what we need to do, and 3 things we can do, are put really concrete ideas on the table that people understand. I think one of the things stopping us from having the movement is we all know that we need to do something about this, but exactly what is it we want the public to do? And I think we haven't been really clear with the public at large about what is it that we see happening. You know, what do we want them to get behind? We talk about quality, but what does that really mean? We talk about a system, but what does that really mean when you're talking to the general public? So I think the first thing we need to do is put ideas on the table that are concrete and that give the public an idea of how we get to that movement, or how we get to quality, not just that we need quality, but how to do it. I think the next thing really has to do with the workforce, as I said. I think the workforce issues are enormous in our field, and that we have not figured out a pathway. And I think we need to stop the silliness of the debate about is it a degree or is it training, but we need to figure out how we do a better job of preparing the workforce to do the job that we're asking them to do. And so I think, so how do we do that? What does that really mean? How much training is necessary? Who needs what? And I think we've had some conversations here. Is it the best to have the directors and the leadership with an education? Or do the teachers all need what are we really talking about? I would put out there that we need to start with the leadership in this field and make sure that directors of programs have the degrees to lead the people who they're trying to help do this job better. And that is one of the lessons that I learned from the military experience when we built that system. It was a combination of training and education. It wasn't an either or. So I think that's that's another one. And then, as I said, I really want to get back to this issue of, you know, as we move through Race to the Top and the recompetition of the Head Start program, for the field to begin to own the finance issue. I think we have sat around and complained that there's not a lot of money in this system, we can't pay the people what we need to pay them, and we all know this, but then what are we going to do about it? And we shouldn't be sitting around waiting for someone else to decide that for us. We need to get out in front of it. And I think, you know, I look at the issues, and we live in Washington, costs $18,000 a year for an infant in child care in Washington, D.C. That is more than most of our staff make in child care. So how do we get from A to Z? I think this field, I want us to own it. And when I look up here at these people sitting on this, we need these people to help us. He's a businessman. He understands finance and how do you do the business of what we do. We need help because we're early childhood and we don't know that. And, you know, and it's not nature to us to think bottom line. But we need the help of someone like Bill, because until we get best thinking in, we're not going to solve this problem. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I really think it's going to turn to the
Let me just roll in for just a second. Well, no, I don't. You guys know a lot more about this than I do, but I wanted to go back to something Bill said because I think it's spot on. He used the term Sputnik moment. Most of you aren't old enough, aren't old enough to remember Sputnik, but the amount of energy that this country is able to harness when it is focused and determined against what it regards as an existential threat is incredible. But Lucky's, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Chairman and Joint Chiefs of Staff, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Chief of Staff of the Army. This is just Chip Lucky's view of the world. I think unless and until we are able to articulate the magnitude of this problem in almost existential terms, the energy that we're talking about being able to generate is not going to be here. Now, I commend two things to you. Number one, I'm going to go back to national security because I personally think that is a way to frame this discussion in a nonpartisan, apolitical way that isn't just about helping somebody out. This is about helping all of us out together. And that's what we're really talking about. But that has not yet become to the front of the discussion. And as Bill says, you know, we can fight about all the, what I regard as, you know, if you will, tangential issues, but when we get down to a common core issue about national security, somehow we haven't, this has not risen to that level. It needs to. The second thing is I would commend everybody in this room, if you haven't seen it, at least give some thought to going to the website for the Council on Foreign Relations. Joel Klein and Connie Rice about 4 weeks ago released a report, a whole bunch of smart educators on it, published by the Council of Foreign Relations. You can get it online, you can buy it at Amazon for a couple bucks. And it links specifically national security and national security risk with education in America, and the fact that education in America is not what it's going to have to be for us to be able to survive in the 21st century as a nation the way we want to. That's why I made the comment before about the American dream, not the American memory. So I don't have a good set of answers on all the specifics about what we need to be doing out there. Lucky's own personal view, the first thing we need to do is get people's attention. Because unless and until we do that, frankly, I think the rest of it's too hard. This only becomes doable when the American people recognize, ultimately, this is about survival as America as we know it, and we need to get at it. But I think that's part of what you all can do. You know your business, understand the linkage between what you do, what you bring to this enterprise, and how it's going to enable America to meet this national security challenges of the 21st century, and speak through that, if you will, with that voice. I think take you, multiply you by 10, multiply that by 10, all of a sudden, you're starting to sound something like a movement. And that's fundamentally where we need to go.
You know, General, I was interested in the two different ways you sort of talked about this, the national security piece. But at the same time, you also spoke to the families returning, the service folks returning to the, so that's sort of two different places. One, the national security, basically you're saying is just we have to raise up a bunch of smart people who can handle the future and certainly more than 1 in 5 be eligible to enlist. But you're also talking about the vulnerables. Would you talk about some of our vulnerable families now?
Yeah, you're right. They're very different concepts, and they come from a different place in my own experience. The vulnerables, if you will, first of all, I think a lot of it's latent. I mean, I'm not sure we even have, we in the U.S. military really have our arms around the scope of the challenges we may be facing, particularly, as I said before, in those communities that have individual soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and families returning. And we have all kinds of dependent kids out there, dependent in the sense that their mom or dad is in the U.S. military, in the Guard or the Reserve, and yet the educators don't know that, and it's not their fault. It's just, they don't know that, this young child's mom or dad has served multiple tours in combat, and all the challenges that may be, attendant in those homes when spouses come home. I guess the only thing I can say is it's too soon to say how big the problem's going to be. I know, as I said before, the senior leadership of the U.S. military is very concerned about the stress and strain that 10 years of pretty much continuous combat operations in a couple different countries, the stress and strain that's put on your Army, your Navy, your Marine Corps, and your Air Force, and particularly the families. The challenge from the military's perspective, and particularly at the Secretariat level, the Department of Defense level, the challenge is going to be getting back to the rigor you were talking about. The challenge is going to be making sure we're investing in the right programs that are helping those families, because we can't afford to invest in the wrong ones, because we don't have the money to do that anymore. Because we also need to continue to invest in modernizing weapon systems. We need to invest in the usual day-to-day business of running a military that's got over 1 million people in it. So it's going to be about applying intellectual rigor to figuring out what's working, what's not working, and investing where we've seen success. And we aren't done with that process yet.
Yeah, and I want to add something to this, because I think one of the things that I've learned over my career, and part of my job right now really has to do with this interdepartmental communication and relationships. And, and some of you know through the Race to the Top work that we've been working very, much with the Department of Education on this. But there are so many other places that we need to go to build this, movement that we're talking about. And I'm always struck when we work in Washington about, again, some of it gets back to the communication and how we define things, but the fact that I say to people when I talk anymore that we all think the elephant looks a certain way depending on where we're standing and looking at the elephant. So if you're looking at the tail end, it looks like one thing, and on the other. One of the things that struck me, even with work with the Department of Education along the way, has been that we constantly have to communicate to the Department of Education that the workforce, that a teacher in our world is not the same as a teacher in their world. And it's all, again, where you see the elephant. And so we've been doing a lot of work with the health community now in trying to break down the stovepipes between our two worlds, and we're within one agency. And again, it strikes me as the health community sees some of the work we do one way and we see it another. And so we've spent time sitting down and saying, here's what we're doing and here's what that means to us, with the folks at Maternal and Child Health. And they have said back to us, this is what it means to us. And you all of a sudden begin to see that, oh my goodness, we're not even talking about the same elephant. So I think getting back to some of the things that we need to talk about here and put on the table is we should not make too many assumptions, when we start working outside of our own groups, because other people don't see it necessarily the way we do. And so I tell the staff, start with a definition. When I say teacher, this is what I mean. When I say quality, this is what I mean. When I say, and define your terms and move on. Because I think, again, we just have got to get everyone thinking, at least that the problem, everybody understands it's the same problem. and I'm not sure that we're there yet.
I think that's very true. And there's a good segue there to ask Bill a little bit about the Chamber, who came out in favor. The U.S. Chamber wrote an incredibly powerful statement about the importance of early education, trying to articulate the message, articulate the need, as you said, General. So what's happened since then? I mean, anything?
I don't know, I retired. Well, it takes a little while for these things to manifest themselves in local communities, and I think that's the trick. I think taking what I think was a very big step by a U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Now, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a very large organization, and it happens to have 3 nonprofits associated with it. The Institute for Competitive Workforce, the Business Civic Leadership Center, and their foundation. Everything else that goes along with on the U.S. Chamber is business-driven. It's taking political stances. It's doing whatever sometimes you think, what have they done now? And sometimes you go, well, that's good. But this whole issue of the 3 nonprofits at the Chamber, that's where American companies come together to talk about social issues that we care about. And Tom Donahue, who heads up the Chamber, and his senior staff are very supportive of all the efforts going on to help with these social issues. I think obviously what's driving a lot of it is the ability of American companies and companies in general to be successful, to be able to hire people. Well, you're not going to be able to hire folks who aren't ready to be hired. I'll make this kind of twist this. I don't know an answer to your question, so I'm making this stuff up. So I got, well, not really, but so I work for GlaxoSmithKline, major pharmaceutical company, high-tech company. We've got, obviously in this country, 30% of American kids drop out of high school, 50% of minority kids drop out. Of those who do graduate from high school, 1 or 3 go to college or something along those lines, and only about 10% of those graduate. At a company like ours, like GSK, we're looking for the best and brightest because we're trying to find drugs to take care of cancer. And the high-tech world, if you look at what goes on at IBM and Cisco and Nortel, not Nortel, but it's a ball game that we're not playing in very well. And the Chamber of Commerce knows that very well. The local chambers of commerce are extremely involved, at least in the progressive communities, in this whole issue of how to get kids ready for the world of work. And they all know it starts birth through 5. And Linda, as I'm kind of reading between the lines a little bit, your Health and Human Services kind of does deal with these kids 0 to 5. Then the Department of Education Department picks up at first or kindergarten through that point. So the lives of these kids are in your hands, so to speak, until they get old enough to go to school. Then it's a different branch. That's even more important for large organizations like your 2 departments to work together and have the kind of dialogue. But there is an incredible opportunity to bring the business community, the people who hire the folks, and who care very deeply about whether those young children are going to be trained to come to work there, to be a partner in this whole process.
One of the things that I think I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I think it is germane to the conversation we're having here, I think about it a lot in the work that I do with the Department of Education. And those of you in this room, I mean, there's some exceptions here in North Carolina because North Carolina does put, a fair amount of state money into early care and education. But by and large, across this country, early care and education is financed with whatever it comes out of the Department of Health and Human Services. I mean, it is the Child Care and Development Block Grant, the Head Start program, and a few other smaller programs where we send money out to the states, and it's generally in a block grant form. Then you go into the public school system, and almost, I think it's 90, I'm not sure of the exact amount, but I think it's not something like 91, 94% of all funding is local and state. And so what we have going on is our 2 systems that are trying to work together, where one of the systems is almost entirely federally dependent, and the other system is locally dependent. And I think, when I think about how we bring these funding streams and this effort to, to finance this whole early care and education movement, we've got to rethink the funding strategies of all of this in this country, and how do we get states to do more of what North Carolina has done, which is put state money in on top of federal money, which does tend to buy you higher quality care in this state than your neighboring state just south of you that puts no money or little money in. And, you know, that is a reality, and I think that is something that we think a lot about in terms of just thinking about the differences between the departments, and how do you begin to work together. Well, part of it is in realizing just that fact.
And you know, that is actually one of the great things about Smart Start, is that it's not just that we have the money from the state, but that we have the local infrastructure to grow, to move it forward, and all of these people, these good people in this room and others who've been here this week, who take that very personally. It's their community, it's their kids, and they're going to put the public dollars to good use.
And you're also supporting this in your state legislature, and you're moving that forward as a state initiative. And I think that is, you know, at the crux of what needs to happen here.
Right. So we have just a very last few words. General?
Leadership, energy, execution. It's all about. It's all about the people in this room who are all leaders, or they wouldn't be here. It's also about generating the energy behind the idea so that they can get out there and get at it. And then it's about executing with some fidelity, so that we're making sure we're making the right investments. We're getting past turf wars or stovepipes or whatever other Washington euphemism you want to use for ineffective ways of taking care of business. Leadership, energy, execution. I appreciate everything you all are doing for America and what you're doing for, I know, for all the kids that are on the way up, whether they're going to go work for GlaxoSmithKline or the United States Army. We appreciate your investment in tomorrow, and take care. Thank you.
I would be remiss, General, if I didn't just hope that before you leave, you have an opportunity to talk to some of our local partnership leaders who have built programs for many of our military families across the state. And I do also want you to know that I know of at least one member of our family here whose husband is presently deployed in Afghanistan. I can't see her. And typically in our audience, because North Carolina, 1 out of every 10 North Carolinians is involved in the military and working on our behalf. So I hope those of you who are either veterans or, and I know there are multiple veterans, will come speak to the General after we close. So, okay, Bill, last few words.
I couldn't say it any better than the General did. I think leadership is probably the top issue in being able to rally, Governor Hunt type leadership at the top to make, and I'm very serious about that, because I think we need a governor, we need people in strategic positions to give the vision, the guidance, and help rally the troops, if you will, to be able to address this issue, because things are not going to get better unless we take the bull by the horns and really pull together the funding and the commitment that we're going to have for the lives of these children. And that's the one thing that we always need to keep in mind. It is every one of these individual children that we need to impact the lives of, and that's what we're here to do. And thank every one of you sincerely for what you do in your local communities. It is critically important.
Linda?
Boy, these are two tough acts to follow, I have to say. You know, what always strikes me when I try and close out on something like this is that to remind people in the room, and those of you who've heard me talk before have heard me say this, I think at the end of the day, what we need to think about is what is on these pictures behind us, and that all the work that we're doing should be focused on those faces, and that if we can't see a face at the end of the work that we're doing, we've missed the goal. And so if we work on a system to do what? It's all about a child. And I say, when I talk, I rarely get up in the morning and get in my car that I don't try to picture a child And that's why I'm going to work, and I know it's why you all are going to work, but we need to keep a child at the center of what we do, and we won't miss the mark. I really believe that.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your time and your thinking about this with us. It really is a great honor to have all three of you here. And I know I say that for all of the folks who've been in the conference for the last couple of days. You know, it's interesting, you've used words that we've used through the course of the last couple of days. In the opening session, I actually spoke to the partnerships, and I said that one of the things that I hoped for in the future was that, one of the things that I've learned over and over again, he has to teach me, is what it means to be relentless. And I certainly continue to learn that from Governor Jim Hunt, who absolutely will not stop until every person he meets, whether they're in the elevator or on the street or in his church, that everyone understands how critical the young children are to the future of our state. So learning that, and I challenge you all to practice that kind of relentlessness and that kind of commitment. And I think the other thing that I certainly have learned in the course of, as we've been here together, is I think there's more to it than that. There's not just the relentlessness, which makes it sound like work, but there's also the real joy of learning new things and meeting new people. And so I hope that you all will go out into the communities and carry that joy with you and express the need and the wonder that we have when we picture one face for one child. So thank you all for a great conference.